And this is why we often resist so much, because a part of us dies in that moment and a new version of us is born. The more weight that, something carries, the bigger the ego death, and why it's sometimes so terrifying, because we're reinventing ourselves. What up, Casanova? So today I want to talk to you guys about the idea of identity and permission, okay? And how it is absolutely critical to have a fluid and healthy sense of identity, an ever-evolving one, or allowing it to ever evolve in order to succeed and to be happy, to really flourish in life. And that really ties in with this idea of permission. Okay, they really kind of go hand in hand, because I believe that permission is one of the most important things that you need. The ability to give yourself permission to pursue things in life, the permission to change, okay, to go after what you want, to become a different person. Okay, you need that permission. And it's one of the biggest things that clients come to me for, essentially, for me to help them, to give them permission, to give themselves permission, okay? It always starts with you saying, I allow myself, I elect myself. They say a president or any kind of leader first elects himself or herself before anyone else can get behind them, essentially, okay? They first have to give themselves the permission to go after something, to say, hey, I can be that person. So first I want to talk about this idea of how we can start shifting our identity or our ego from rigid to fluid, okay? To stop seeing ourselves as a victim, a failure, the tough guy, the nice guy, the serious guy, okay? Any kind of rigid persona that we have created, or any kind of rigid identity that we have created over the years as a byproduct of our experiences, our upbringing, our experiential conditioning is what I wanted to say. This is something that's common to everyone. And with some people, it's, the personas are a lot more rigid. The identities that they've created and the narratives around the identities they've created are very rigid. That prevents them from tapping into other sides of themselves that lay dormant, okay? Other sides of tapping into their potential, essentially. That's something that I work with a lot of my clients, learning to become multifaceted and tapping into sides of themselves that they didn't even know existed. Without getting too much into ego and identity, and the different definitions of it. There's the psychoanalytical definition, and there's this version and that version, and the spiritual version. I mean, there's a certain kind of simple kind of spiritual explanation for ego and identity. It's essentially, in spirituality, they say, your spirit is the higher self and your ego is your lower self. And it's almost like think of it as like a video gamer character type of dichotomy or type of dynamic, where the higher self is almost observing and in some sense guiding the lower self. Depends on how you kind of want to look at it. I think it's helpful for our purposes to see the higher self, the spirit, as not only the observer, but as also the gamer, okay? The player controlling the character, and the character is your ego. Okay, the character is this identity that has been created as a byproduct of, where you were born and what you were taught and the conversations you had and the books you read and the movies you saw. Just anything that happened in your life that shaped your image of yourself, your story about yourself, who you think you are. Now, basically, the idea is that the ego is almost like the vessel for the soul. It's that through which the spirit gets to experience life, essentially. the player gets to experience the character through the ego. And it's almost like one is plugged into the other. In the book, The Untethered Soul, he kind of lays out some of the fundamental spirituality quite eloquently. And so hence why you feel what the character feels. So it's this identity that's been created. Now, there's nothing wrong. You often hear this whole notion that the ego is bad and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, we have to eliminate the ego death. It's like, no, okay, that's not possible, nor is it necessary. The idea is to have a healthy and a fluid ego, a fluid sense of identity that can continue to evolve, that's going to allow you, the player, to experience life, to go to higher levels in life, to let the character go to higher levels in life and experience all kinds of interesting things. Okay, so to unlock new levels and take on new personas, okay, and go on all kinds of adventures, right? You need the ego, this sense of identity, to be fluid, to allow for change. In fact, every time you unlock new levels or do something new, there is an ego death that happens on a very micro level, even micro level and macro level. Sometimes even when you're resisting to start on a new project, or to start the work day, you're like, fuck, this is going to be tough. And you kind of you push yourself and you start, there's an ego death that happens there. In that moment, a part of you dies, okay? A certain identity dies and a new one is born. Or when you're about to approach a girl, or when you're about to go on a date, or enter something new that's scary, that forces you to confront who you are. And this is why we often resist so much, because a part of us dies in that moment and a new version of us is born. And of course, the more momentous, okay, the more weight that, something carries, the bigger the ego death, and why it's sometimes so terrifying, because we're reinventing ourselves in that moment. And this is why people are so resistant and why they cling to this sense of identity that they've known their whole life, right? Even if it hasn't served them, because it's comfortable. It's what we know. Death is terrifying. Death is terrifying. So we know that we avoid and resist these egoic deaths. We avoid and resist change. We fear it. We fear it so deeply. And, one of the most common fears is fear of failure and fear of success, fear of putting ourselves on the line, right? When it comes to talking to women, for example, guys are terrified. This is something I talk about a lot. Put yourself on the line. Guys are terrified of putting themselves and their entire identity on the line. Put it on the line. Put it on the line and maybe let it die. Challenge it. Okay? Challenge that sense of identity that you've created, that you are the victim, the failure, the tough guy, the serious guy, the guy who doesn't approach girls, the guy who's too cool, the guy who doesn't dress that way. I remember having clients like, no, those shoes are too this and that shirt is too that. No, that kind of joke or that kind of opener, that's not me. And by all means, I always say, of course, you're not here to replicate exactly what I'm doing. You're here to find your own unique voice. I'm here to just kind of give you ideas and options for what you can tap into, okay? To show you what is possible. And then of course you kind of create your own, your own style, your new image. But yeah, the fear is so strong for people, they're terrified of putting themselves on the line, of being vulnerable, of sitting with this idea of identity or egoic change, okay, and what that can result in. It makes us, get caught up with our story, get caught up and cling to our story, but the story doesn't need to be fixed. And that's why I say, it's okay to experience weirdness and awkwardness. In fact, I tell clients to seek that out as exercise, and this is what I do. When we do coaching, I push them into these weird and awkward and challenging situations. You want to do that. Like when you're playing the video game, you get into all kinds of fucking tough situations, right? That's what makes it interesting, right? These challenges. And so that is what makes life engaging, is that possibility for change. And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because we're reborn in a way, okay? We reinvent ourselves every time that this happens. You know, fear of failure, fear of being confronted or reminded of the fact that we are this failure. Okay, this is why guys don't put themselves on the line. It's because, you know, they're afraid of being reminded that this is who they are and that their story is in fact so true, and they get stuck in this loop, right? And fear of success in many ways, and it's something, you know, I've certainly experienced and still in some sense struggle with. You know, there's a lot of things can play into this. It's, you know, feeling like you may not be worthy of happiness, feeling like when there is a certain level of success that maybe it'll disappoint you, fear of change, fear of not knowing how to cope with the new change and the new responsibilities, and maybe needing to deliver more and more as you reach new heights, and there's more scrutiny and there's more pressure, right? As the game evolves, as you unlock these higher levels, as the story changes, as our identity begins to change, that can be terrifying. That can be fucking terrifying. But that's what makes life interesting. Okay, that's what makes life not static and stagnant. And in fact, it's almost designed in this way where if you don't constantly, you know, I always talk about how death, you know, fear of death is the biggest driver. Fear of death, or our relationship with death, I should say, our relationship with death is the biggest driver of what we do. Because it's almost like life is designed to, for one to constantly embrace this idea of death, because it's ultimately coming. It's ultimately coming. And the idea is to constantly be okay with dying and being reborn, with dying and being reborn, with dying and being reborn on a micro level and on a macro level. And it's almost like if you don't do that, you're trying to cheat death. You're trying to run away from that. And that's when we feel that ickiness. That's when we feel that stagnation. That's when we feel that, you know, all of it, bitterness, resentment. We feel like we're kind of just, our soul is rotting away when we try to run away from this idea of change and egoic death. It's swimming against the current in a way, right? The universe wants you to kind of keep unlocking these new levels and reinventing yourself, to show you how fluid life can be, okay? Fluid and loving and ever evolving and interesting life can be, and how the universe does have your back. You know, there's a reason they say fortune favors the bold, right? It's funny how you start to clue into all these sayings, you know, that you never really, these cheesy sayings that you never really paid much attention to, you know, where the universe meets you halfway. It's because it wants you to do that. It wants you to move towards love and enlightenment and unlock these new levels, you know, as opposed to stay rigid and fixed and stagnant and just to kind of rot in your own, in this rigid and often can be toxic bubble of identity that you've created. Hey, what up? It's me again. Just having a cocktail here, but I wanted to quickly interrupt to, one, make sure you're paying attention, and two, to let you know that everything you're learning here is directly and indirectly related to building your dream dating life, and just overall a life that is healthy, win-win, and on your terms. Now, when you're done the video, I recommend you take a few minutes to go to the link below where you can watch a very entertaining and informative video on what steps you need to take to begin your very own transformation. If you're up for it, that is. I guess you first need to ask yourself, and pardon my French here, but do you want to fuck lots of hot poon, or do you want to fuck lots of hunt? As well as find love, discover the meaning of life, and become a self-developed, self-respecting man. Okay, end of pep talk. Back to the video. go check out the link below when you're done, or I will personally call your mother and have her force you. And so something that, really helped me, and I'm sharing this with you guys here, is this idea, that it's all just a game. It's all just a ride. Because it's all just a ride. Don't worry, don't be afraid ever. Because it's all just a ride. That was Bill Hicks. He's a comedian who passed in his 90s. About my age, actually, when he passed away of cancer. Yeah, he was sharing some stuff that he experienced on his acid trips. And I put this here when we reached 100,000 subs as a milestone to kind of remind me that it is all just a ride. And you're creating this ride as you go along. And the more you allow for the ride, to take its fluid course, the more rewarding it's going to be. And so, when we think of this as a game, right? And, there's the player and there's controlling the character, right? So there's Vadim the player. I like this, and let's take this perspective. Vadim the player is controlling Vadim the character. And this allows you to, this really helped me when I was getting good with girls. I was like, I didn't have that kind of, I wasn't into spirituality and didn't take that perspective, but I still had, there was something in me that said, you know what, this is just a game. Hey, don't take it so seriously. Let's go, let's try this out. Let's put ourselves on the line. Let's test this. I actually struggled more when I was building out on the signals to my business journey than I did. Things felt a lot more serious, a lot more real, a lot more permanent than when I was learning to get good with girls. Things felt a lot more impermanent, I didn't constantly have to question my ego and my sense of identity. Of course that happened, but it wasn't as pronounced as it was on my business journey. And some guys experienced the opposite. But I would remember just telling myself, hey man, just a game, go talk to her. It doesn't have to mean anything. And now I understand things on a much deeper level, that it doesn't have to mean anything. You're deciding that it has to mean something. You're assigning all this meaning to it, when in fact, you're just playing the game. Okay? You're there for the ride, and you're observing, your higher self is just observing, the player is observing the character do this thing. And that allows you to take some kind of distance. So we circle back to this idea of permission. You need to give yourself the permission to challenge your ego, to challenge your story, to challenge your sense of identity that you've created, to rise, to go after what you want, to create new stories. You decide. You get to decide. Because you know what? This might be a bit of a mind fuck, but I say this to some students, but you are God, essentially. You are God, essentially. God is acting through you, the universe, the spirit, whatever you want to call it, whatever sits well with you. Okay, I was an atheist for many years as well. I've become more spiritual over the last 3 to 5 years. Okay, if the word God scares you, whatever. And we can get into all that in other videos. Just kind of take my word for it. The universe is acting through you, is acting through your ego. Remember, the ego is the vessel. The ego is the vessel for the spirit, for the universe, for God, whatever you want to fucking call it. It's essentially acting through you, through the character, and manifesting itself. So you get to decide. Think about it. Any successful person, they're successful because they decided it so, right? They said, I'm doing this. I'm making this happen. Elon Musk decided, you know what? There's going to be an electric car market. Just because I said so. Because I fucking said so. I don't know. Steve Jobs said, you know what? I'm going to make the iPhone. Just because I said so. Okay? They can give countless examples. People beating sports records because they said so. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, I recently watched the documentary. He invented Arnold Schwarzenegger. He invented himself. He decided, I'm going to be this fucking character. He created his own character. It's fucking fascinating. I'm sure you guys all know that he had so much pushback from people saying that he could never make it. But he said, no, I decided that I'm going to make it. I did. God is acting through the ego.
So if we tap into that, if you understand that you can give yourself the permission, and I know sometimes it's fucking difficult, okay? And this is why people come to me, because I have to metaphorically hold them by the hand and say, no, you have the permission to challenge this. No, that's just a story in your head. And that's why I push students into all kinds of different scenarios that they didn't think is possible. No, you can go and talk to her again. No, you can go and interrupt. Yes, you can interrupt. Yes, you can hold her by the hand. Yes, you can disagree. Yes, you can assert yourself. Yes. Okay. No, that's just a story you're telling yourself. Okay. So permission, and a fluid sense of identity is the name of the game. Look, I had so many times that I had to give myself permission to become this new person. I remember, out of university, I was working my finance job, and about 2 years into it, I was like, I'm done with this. I was working for an investment firm, and I wanted to trade stocks and options on the side, and I wanted to do that during the day. And I said, well, I need some income. So I said, you know what? I'm going to be fucking waiting tables in the evening to make enough money to support myself and to trade. And I also just really wanted something more social, something new. I had never done that. It was actually kind of terrifying. I had never done that. And I was coming out of a finance job, and I was like, are they even going to fucking hire me? And I had to fake a bunch of shit on my resume to get my foot in the door, fake it till you make it. And I had my friend train me a little bit. His parents ran a little jazz bar restaurant. And I started reading up on wine knowledge. Actually, funny enough, I started, before I even had anything on my resume, I went to the fucking Trump Hotel in Toronto, went to the restaurant on the top floor. Because I had heard that you can make really good money at nice restaurants. And, I thought of myself as like a pretty polished guy, and that I can carry a conversation. I had experience in sales and telemarketing. And by the way, I gave myself permission to do all those things as well. It was fucking weird and scary. And I was like, yep, I'm going to telemarket. I'm just going to like call people up and offer them window estimates. And then I was doing door-to-door sales, selling fucking window cleaning and water heater replacements and all that shit. And let me tell you, door-to-door sales forces you, like it forces you to fucking put yourself on the line and to disturb people and to, disrupt them during dinner and to push your agenda, because you give yourself permission to do so. So I went to the restaurant and the Trump Tower at the top, going straight to the top, and said, hey, can you guys hire me? They're like, do you have experience? I'm like, I have no experience, but I have transferable skills. And she almost kind of laughed, like, I'm sorry, like you need experience, especially at a restaurant like that. And you need wine knowledge. All right. I'm like, all right, okay, cool. I got the feedback, right? I gave myself permission to go to the fucking Trump restaurant with zero experience, waiting tables, and be like, fuck it. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's see what happens, right? This is a mentality I often have, is let's see what happens. So I got the feedback, and then I started studying wine, and I started getting more training, and then I, faked some experience that I can get my foot in the door. I only actually applied for a couple of weeks, and then I ended up traveling for a month. I didn't get any jobs. When I got back, I started working with my friend in his blinds business, doing sales. But something I realized afterwards, like, no one's going to hire you if you're like, the story doesn't really add up. Why are you leaving finance to start? I would talk to some managers and say, hey, I'm trying to do this, but it's a gamble, right? And this was summer, right? And they're like, we need somebody that can really hit the ground running and someone who's going to stay, right? Because in their eyes, they're like, this guy could be fickle. Right? He might try it for a couple of months, then he's going to move on, right? You're coming out of an office job. That's besides the point. The point is, I was like, fuck it. Let's try it out. Let's challenge my story. Let's challenge the sense of identity. I'm the finance guy. I went to business school. I can't wait tables. It's like, who knows? Let's see. Let's give it a shot. And similarly, when I started my YouTube channel, I was fucking terrified. Okay? Terrified doesn't even capture it. My entire identity was in question. Okay, talk about identity in question. My entire sense of fucking identity was in question. Okay, I didn't tell my parents for 6 months what I was doing. It took me 2 months to finally make the decision to take the plunge and say, yeah, I'm going to put myself out there on YouTube picking up girls, right? And remember, I have this story of like, I'm the guy who went to business school and studied finance. And now I'm going to go fucking clown around, make these comedy videos picking up girls. I'm like, am I even good enough, to do this? Like, what is this? Who am I? How will this all end? What does this say about me? Okay. But it's like, you know what? I give myself permission. Fuck it. Let's do it. Cause why not? Let's see if I can. And that's the mentality, right? Let's see if I can. It would be cool if, right? And there's no expectation necessarily, right? And this is the important part here, is that you need to suspend your expectations, right? Because expectations are a form of rigid identity. Isn't that rigidity? You're clinging to some kind of an expectation, some kind of a marker of success, some kind of a timeline. That's a form of rigidity. By the way, self-imposed, it's arbitrary. You're deciding this thing. And so it's important to enter these things, okay, these new levels, okay, these new experience without any rigid expectations. Allow for things to kind of evolve and for you to reinvent yourself and to see what's possible, because you don't fucking know. And this is something I call this the neutral scientist, the curious and neutral scientist. This mentality that I tell clients to adopt, where you basically say, let's see if I can. I'm curious to test this. It would be cool if. It would be funny or interesting to try. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to test this. I'm going to explore this. But you also, and this is where the idea of most engaged and least attached comes in, because you also, right, you want to explore and test, but you also, I talk about this idea, you also want to be the graceful conqueror. You also want to be you want to be the scientist, the neutral scientist, but you also want to be the conqueror. You want to engage with the process. A conqueror is someone who tries to win or procure by effort. Someone who wins or defeats others in a game or sport, who kind of like engages with the process. He really pushes himself. So you want to be the conqueror, you want to be the scientist, and you also want to be the detached gamer. Okay, the conqueror, the scientist, the conqueror, and the gamer. Okay, or the neutral scientist, the graceful conqueror, and the detached gamer. You're testing, you're exploring this curiosity. You're seeing what's possible. Okay, you're also the detached gamer. You're also, saying it's all just a game, it's all just a movie. I want. You're detached from the character in a sense. You're just allowing the character to kind of unlock these new levels and see what's possible. And you're putting the character in these new situations, right? Without getting too invested, even though you feel what the character feels. And it can be brutal at times, but you don't get too involved and too attached to the story. You let the story evolve. You let the egoic deaths happen. When we get too attached to the story, we resist the death. You see? And lastly, again, you're also the graceful conqueror. You're also you're playing to win. You're not playing not to lose. You're playing to fucking win. So you're most engaged with the process, but you're least attached. Least attached does not mean you're indifferent. You're not indifferent. There's a difference. You're fucking playing to win, but you're not attached in the sense that you have no control over what happens, and you're not getting caught up in some kind of arbitrary markers of success or some kind of stories or narratives or identities or timelines. You're not caught up in that. There are no rigid expectations. And this is where a lot of the suffering happens, is this attachment. And I've struggled with this a lot, let me tell you, right? But this is where a lot of the suffering happens, is when we get attached to something. Like, no, I got to meet this marker of success and this timeline and this many girls and this and this and this, right? And it's like when it doesn't happen, we judge ourselves and we suffer, right? Because we're clinging to the story, the identity, the expectation. You basically recognize that how it's actually going to go is out of your control. How the story actually unfolds, or the game, is out of your control. All you can do is engage with the process as best you can and recognize, yeah, you're going to fuck up. The character's going to go through all kinds of turmoil and change. and failure and disappointments and all that stuff. And that's part of the journey. And only when you judge the character, okay, and the judgment happens because of the identity that you've created. And only when you judge the character, that's when you suffer and when you hold yourself back from unlocking the new levels. So embody these traits of the neutral curious scientist, the graceful conqueror, and the detached gamer so that you can really put yourself out there, give yourself permission, and conquer life.
All right, man. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying this content and that it really helps you make some moves in the right direction. Sincerely, because everything I teach, I have lived and breathed and contemplated ad nauseum. Unlike a bunch of these cookie cutter life coach clowns out there that regurgitate some shit they read in a book and call themselves experts. With that in mind, if you want to go deeper, if you want to really know what it takes to become the kind of guy that can confidently attract and manage relationships with quality women on your terms and in a way that is healthy and honest, no scummy or gimmicky shit here. And if you generally want to live a life of truth, freedom, love, courage, and adventure, then as Tom Cruise famously said in Jerry Maguire, help me help you, and go click the link below. There's a very entertaining and informative video that will shed some light on how you can get started. Do it, or you will forever perish into the dark abyss. But seriously, go check it out. Let's kickstart this journey of personal development together and help you reinvent yourself into a sex god.